Victor Kane seemed like an ordinary handyman in Ravenswood, but behind closed doors, he was orchestrating a hidden world of fear, obsession, and terror that no one could have imagined. The town of Ravenswood had always been a place where life moved slowly, where the biggest disturbance might be a broken fence or a lost pet. Streets were lined with modest houses, their gardens neatly trimmed, and neighbors knew each other by name. The town thrived on routine and predictability, a quiet haven where children played freely and strangers were a rare sight. But on one sweltering summer morning, that fragile sense of security was shattered forever. A delivery driver, taking a shortcut through the outskirts of town, noticed an old cabin tucked away behind overgrown trees and bushes. The structure had long been abandoned, the paint peeling, windows clouded with grime. Something about it drew his attention, a strange unease he couldn't quite explain. Driven by curiosity, he peered through a cracked window and saw a faint glimmer of light inside. Alarmed, he called the police. When officers arrived, the cabin seemed normal at first, dusty and decrepit, smelling of mildew and neglect. But as they examined it, they discovered a false wall hidden in the back corner of the main room. Behind it lay a small, windowless chamber, the size of a walk-in closet. Inside, the walls were plastered with photographs, dozens of them, each one capturing ordinary people in moments of vulnerability. Some were asleep in their homes, others alone in public spaces, unaware of being watched. There were hundreds of images, all meticulously organized, and many had dates and notes scribbled in the margins, though the meaning remained obscure. Among the photos were symbols scratched into the walls, shapes that seemed almost ritualistic, their purpose incomprehensible. The police were stunned. Such a collection suggested obsession, meticulous planning, and a deep-seated compulsion. The owner of the cabin, Victor Kane, had vanished years earlier without a trace. Neighbors remembered him as a quiet man who kept to himself, always polite, but never particularly social. No one could recall him expressing hostility or anger, making the discovery all the more chilling. Investigators began piecing together his life, examining property records, utility bills, and any hint of contact with the outside world. The more they uncovered, the stranger it became. Kane had lived a double life, one that no one could have suspected. His disappearance, once considered a mystery, now seemed inseparably linked to the hidden chamber. What he had left behind suggested a darkness lurking beneath the ordinary, a calculated intrusion into the lives of unsuspecting people, and a story that Ravenswood would never forget. As investigators delved deeper into Victor Kane's past, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. By day, he had lived a seemingly ordinary life, fixing leaky faucets, mowing lawns, and doing odd jobs for neighbors who barely gave him a second thought. But by night, he disappeared into shadows, leaving no trace except the chilling evidence he had left behind. Diaries discovered in a hidden drawer revealed hours of obsessive writing, entries filled with meticulous observations, sketches, and cryptic notes about people he had encountered. Kane chronicled every detail of their routines, the routes they took, the times they left their homes, and even the way they slept. It became clear that he wasn't merely observing. He was orchestrating a form of psychological control, mapping out lives with precision and intent. Some entries hinted at a darker fascination with fear and manipulation. Kane seemed to derive satisfaction from the subtle ways he could influence others without their knowledge. He recorded experiments in controlling outcomes, predicting reactions, and testing limits. At first, police believed these were just eccentric musings, but as they cross-referenced his notes with the photographs and symbols in the hidden room, the reality became horrifyingly clear. Kane's observations had not been random. They were methodical, designed to instill unease and track compliance. Certain dates were underlined repeatedly in his journals, suggesting ritualistic significance, yet the exact purpose remained elusive. Each detail he captured was part of a larger plan, one that investigators struggled to fully comprehend. Even more unsettling were hints that some townspeople had been unknowingly caught in Kane's schemes. A neighbor remembered a figure lurking in the trees behind her home, and another spoke of strange noises at night that had gone unexplained. The police realized that the calm, friendly veneer of Ravenswood had masked years of silent intrusion. Kane had created a private world where he controlled everything, and the townspeople had been unwitting participants. It wasn't just stalking. It was an elaborate, calculated obsession with domination and secrecy. As detectives continued to investigate, they discovered that Kane had collected objects beyond photographs, trinkets, locks of hair, and other personal items from his targets, each carefully labeled and preserved. The magnitude of his obsession suggested he had been at it for far longer than anyone realized. The more they uncovered, the more they understood that Victor Kane had lived a life entirely separate from the one the town had known, a double existence that left a web of fear and mystery in its wake. Ravenswood's quiet streets were forever stained by the knowledge that someone had been watching all along, and that the darkness Kane created had only just begun to reveal itself. The investigation took a shocking turn when authorities discovered a hidden compartment beneath the cabin's creaking floorboards. Inside were dozens of old videotapes, neatly labeled and stacked in order. Each tape appeared mundane at first glance: people walking through a park, sitting alone in their homes, performing ordinary tasks. But as detectives watched, the true horror became apparent. Shadows moved where they shouldn't, glimpses of a figure lurking in corners, sometimes almost invisible. The tapes were not just recordings. They were a methodical study of fear, capturing moments when the subjects were completely unaware of being watched. One tape showed a young woman wandering a forest trail, sunlight filtering through the trees, oblivious to the shadows silently following her. Another depicted a child asleep in a dimly lit room, a figure gliding around the bed, and a faint whisper that could barely be heard. The realization sent shivers through the investigators. These were not accidental recordings, and the subjects were more than just victims. They were part of Kane's obsession. Forensic experts examined the footage frame by frame. They found subtle signs that some individuals had been manipulated to create distress. Small objects were moved, doors left open, lights flickered at precise intervals, all designed to unsettle the unsuspecting. In some tapes, the aftermath of minor physical harm was evident. Though most subjects appeared to have survived, the sheer attention to detail indicated a meticulous, obsessive mind. Kane had been carefully studying human behavior, testing reactions, and perhaps even perfecting techniques for control. Every camera angle, every pause, every hidden shot had a purpose, and the extent of his planning revealed a chilling intelligence. The tapes also exposed patterns, dates, and locations that linked Kane's activities to places far beyond Ravenswood. Police realized that he had not confined himself to a single town. The symbols scratched into the cabin walls appeared on items and in backgrounds in the recordings, suggesting a broader, ritualistic obsession. Each tape became a map of his movements, but it also posed a terrifying question: how many people had been unknowingly involved, and how many encounters had gone unnoticed? As investigators cataloged the evidence, it became clear that the cabin was merely the heart of a larger, more sinister network. Kane had documented life itself, turning ordinary moments into exercises in fear. The more detectives understood his methods, the deeper their unease grew. This was no ordinary criminal. This was a man who had spent years meticulously weaving terror into the lives of innocent people, all while remaining invisible. Ravenswood had only just begun to glimpse the extent of Victor Kane's dark and twisted world, and the tapes hinted at horrors that were far from over. As investigators followed the trail left by Victor Kane, they uncovered evidence that extended far beyond Ravenswood. Records, receipts, and faintly scribbled notes indicated that Kane had traveled frequently, visiting neighboring towns and states, always maintaining the same eerie patterns of observation and control. Detectives began mapping his movements and realized that the symbols scratched into the walls of the cabin matched marks found at other crime scenes hundreds of miles away. Each mark, each pattern was a signature, a mark of ownership and obsession. It became painfully clear that Ravenswood was only one node in a sprawling web of manipulation, one small town touched by a predator whose reach was far greater than anyone could have imagined. The investigation turned even darker when authorities interviewed locals who had once crossed paths with Kane. A retired mail carrier remembered seeing him loitering in alleyways, watching homes with an intensity that was hard to explain. A shopkeeper recalled small, seemingly meaningless incidents: a shadow glimpsed through a window, a door left unlocked after a visit. These recollections, when combined with Kane's diaries and the videotapes, painted a terrifying picture of a man who had spent years hiding in plain sight, weaving fear into the lives of unsuspecting people. He had studied his targets meticulously, learning their routines, their habits, and their weaknesses. The normalcy of everyday life had been a mask for something far more sinister. Authorities also discovered that Kane had connections to a network of like-minded individuals, people obsessed with surveillance and psychological manipulation. Emails and letters suggested an exchange of tips, techniques, and recordings, an underground world dedicated to control and fear. Each clue pointed to a methodical, almost ritualistic approach. As if Kane were both student and teacher in a secret curriculum of terror. The realization left investigators unsettled. Not only had Kane been manipulating the town for years, but he had also been part of a larger, coordinated effort to observe, frighten, and dominate. The scope of his crimes was overwhelming. It was no longer a story of a single reclusive man. It was the revelation of a hidden network and a chilling expertise in human manipulation. Detectives realized that every corner of Ravenswood, every shadowed street and overgrown lot, had been part of Kane's experiment. The town's innocence had been stripped away, replaced by an awareness that the mundane was a carefully orchestrated illusion. The more they uncovered, the more apparent it became that the darkness Kane had created had spread far beyond the cabin walls, leaving a legacy of fear that no investigation could fully contain. Months passed after the cabin and its disturbing contents had been discovered, yet Victor Kane remained elusive. Investigators combed through every lead, from surveillance footage to eyewitness accounts, tracing him across state lines. Then, finally, a break came. A grainy security video at a remote gas station showed Kane, older and thinner than the last images they had of him, blending into the crowd with practiced anonymity. Authorities prepared a coordinated operation to apprehend him, but when they arrived at the location indicated by the footage, the cabin Kane had been using as a hideout was empty. There was no trace of him, no signs of a struggle, and no hint of where he might have gone next. It was as if he had dissolved into thin air, leaving behind only the artifacts of his obsession. The unanswered questions left a chilling weight over Ravenswood. The tapes, diaries, and photographs had been cataloged and analyzed, but they could only tell part of the story. Kane's influence had stretched far beyond the town, touching lives in ways no one could fully measure. Each revelation about his travels, his patterns, and his network of like-minded individuals only deepened the sense of unease. The town that once prided itself on its calm, orderly life now carried a lingering fear, a quiet paranoia that someone or something was always watching. The residents knew that the darkness Kane had created was not contained within the walls of his cabin. It had seeped into their everyday lives, leaving an invisible mark that could not be erased. Authorities continued to warn neighboring communities, hoping to prevent similar acts of manipulation, but the truth was inescapable. Victor Kane was brilliant at evading capture, meticulous in his planning, and utterly unrepentant. Even with all the evidence left behind, there was no clear pattern that could guarantee his next move. The psychological footprint he left behind was as unsettling as the physical evidence: diaries full of obsessive calculations, tapes capturing intimate fears, and photographs that recorded lives without permission. Each piece painted a picture of a man who thrived in secrecy, who turned ordinary moments into a tapestry of terror. To this day, Victor Kane remains missing. Law enforcement considers him extremely dangerous, yet the cabin and its contents stand as the only tangible record of his crimes. Ravenswood has never recovered, and the town's residents live with the understanding that some horrors are not meant to be fully solved. They wait quietly, knowing that the darkness Kane created has not ended, it has only been postponed. His legacy is a haunting reminder that some evils operate in the shadows, invisible, yet all-encompassing, and that the most disturbing stories are often those that remain unfinished.